The Tuskegee Airmen's 1949 Top Gun victory, the champion's history tried to forget. 4 years after World War II ended, the pilots of the Tuskegee Airmen were called upon to prove themselves again. They had already flown combat missions over North Africa and Europe. They had escorted American bombers into hostile skies, attacked enemy positions, and confronted German fighter aircraft. At the same time, they had served a country that segregated them, doubted their intelligence, and questioned whether black men possessed the discipline or ability to become military aviators. Yet even after their wartime record, the burden of proof remained upon them. In May 1949, that burden followed 4 black pilots from Lockbourne Air Force Base, Ohio, into the Nevada desert. There, at Las Vegas Air Force Base, later renamed Nellis Air Force Base, they entered the United States Air Force's first major fighter gunnery meet. The competition brought together some of the finest fighter units in the nation. It was an early predecessor to the sophisticated aerial weapons competitions that would later become associated with the phrase, Top Gun. The Tuskegee Airmen did not arrive merely to participate. They arrived to win. A new Air Force with an old problem. The United States Air Force had become an independent military branch in September 1947. But independence from the Army did not immediately free it from the racial segregation that had shaped American military life. Black pilots, mechanics, armorers, radio operators, instructors, and support personnel remained concentrated within segregated organizations such as the 332nd Fighter Group and 332nd Fighter Wing at Lockbourne. The 332nd carried the combat heritage of the Tuskegee Airmen. Its squadrons included the 99th, 100th, and 301st Fighter Squadrons, units whose pilots had fought in World War II while operating under racist assumptions that expected them to fail. President Harry S. Truman signed Executive Order 9981 on July 26, 1948, declaring a policy of equal treatment and opportunity within the armed forces. However, the process of military integration was only beginning when the 1949 competition was announced. The black aviators of the 332nd were therefore preparing to compete at a moment when their unit's future and the place of black personnel throughout the Air Force remained unsettled. Their performance would carry a meaning far beyond trophies. Every maneuver would become evidence. Every round fired would become testimony. Every target struck would challenge the claim that black pilots were inferior. The first Air Force gunnery meet. On March 2, 1949, Las Vegas Air Force Base was selected to host the Air Force's inaugural gunnery meet. 2 months later, on May 2nd, 12 teams representing 5 major commands assembled in Nevada. The competition included both jet-powered and piston-engine aircraft. Participating units flew aircraft such as the F-80 Shooting Star, F-84 Thunderjet, F-51 Mustang, F-82 Twin Mustang, and F-47 Thunderbolt. The 332nd was the only team competing with the F-47. The Thunderbolt was rugged and powerful, but it belonged to an earlier generation of fighter aircraft. Some competing teams arrived with newer or more advanced machines. The Tuskegee Airmen understood that their aircraft would not win the contest for them. Training would have to overcome technology. Precision would have to overcome prejudice. The competition would be decided not by reputation, but by the pilot's ability to place bullets, rockets, and bombs exactly where they intended. The 4 men selected. The 332nd selected 4 experienced pilots to represent the organization. Captain Alva Temple, of the 301st Fighter Squadron, served as team captain. First Lieutenant Harry T. Stewart, Jr., of the 100th Fighter Squadron, joined him as one of the primary competitors. First Lieutenant James H. Harvey III, of the 99th Fighter Squadron, completed the 3-man flying team. First Lieutenant Halbert Alexander, also from the 99th Fighter Squadron, served as the alternate pilot. Each man represented more than himself. Behind them stood the pilots who had trained at Tuskegee, the mechanics who kept their aircraft flying, the armorers who maintained their weapons, and the black service members whose abilities had been restricted by segregation. According to an account later recalled by James Harvey, Colonel Benjamin O. Davis, Jr., one of the most important commanders in Tuskegee Airmen history, gave the team an unmistakable order: "If you don't win, don't come back." The words reflected confidence, pressure, and an understanding of the stakes. The pilots were being sent into an arena where second place might be interpreted not as a respectable finish, but as confirmation of every racist assumption surrounding them.
8 days of precision. The competition continued for approximately 8 days and tested far more than a pilot's ability to fly quickly. The events included air-to-air gunnery, air-to-ground gunnery, dive bombing, skip bombing, rocket firing, and panel strafing. A later Air Force account identified aerial gunnery events conducted at both 12,000 and 20,000 feet. Air Combat Command. Each event demanded a different combination of judgment, timing, aircraft control, and weapons proficiency. In aerial gunnery, pilots had to maneuver into position and fire accurately while operating at altitude. During dive bombing, they had to point their aircraft toward the ground, maintain the correct angle, release at the proper moment, and recover before descending too far. Rocket attacks required careful alignment because unguided rockets did not correct themselves after launch. Panel strafing measured the concentration of machine gun fire against a designated target. Skip bombing demanded an especially dangerous form of low-level precision. A pilot released a bomb close to the ground so that it would travel forward by striking and skipping across the surface before reaching its target. There was little room for hesitation. A fraction of a second could separate a direct hit from a complete miss. Taking the lead. The pilots of the 332nd quickly established themselves as the team to beat. After the aerial gunnery events, the Tuskegee Airmen were leading the competition. Captain Temple was also positioned near the top of the individual standings. The team's performance in dive bombing was less dominant, but the 332nd retained its overall lead. Then came skip bombing. Each pilot received 6 bombs. Temple scored 6 hits from 6 attempts. Stewart scored 6 from 6. Harvey scored 6 from 6. 18 bombs had been released by the 3 pilots, and all 18 struck as required. During rocket firing, Temple again reportedly scored 6 hits from 6 launches. Stewart and Harvey each recorded 5 hits from 6. The men flying the older F-47s were not merely keeping pace with their competitors, they were outperforming units equipped with Mustangs, twin Mustangs, and early jet fighters. Air Combat Command. Their success was not accidental. It reflected years of combat preparation, disciplined teamwork, and an institutional culture formed under extraordinary pressure. The Tuskegee Airmen had always known that mistakes committed by white pilots would be treated as individual failures, while mistakes committed by black pilots could be used to condemn an entire race. That knowledge had demanded excellence from the beginning. In Nevada, excellence became victory. The best piston engine team, and the best overall. When the final scores were calculated, the 332nd Fighter Group had captured the award for the best piston engine team. But the Tuskegee Airmen had accomplished something even greater. They also finished as the best team overall, defeating every participating piston engine and jet team. An official Air Force history states that the 332nd defeated the next closest team, the 82nd Fighter Group flying Mustangs, by 21.58 points. The nearest jet team, the 4th Fighter Group flying F-80S, finished 46.4 points behind the Tuskegee Airmen.
Air Combat Command. The victory was decisive. The Tuskegee Airmen had entered the Air Force's first major fighter weapons competition using an older aircraft and representing a segregated organization. They left as champions. They had not won a special category created for black pilots. They had not competed against weakened opposition. They had defeated elite fighter teams from across the United States Air Force under the same scoring system, over the same ranges, and through the same demanding events. Their victory directly contradicted the racist beliefs that had nearly prevented black Americans from entering military aviation. The scoreboard had become a civil rights document. A victory followed by disappearance. Yet the story did not receive the recognition it deserved. For decades, Air Force Association almanacs reportedly identified the winner of the 1949 meet as unknown. The trophy also disappeared from public view and was eventually located in storage at the National Museum of the United States Air Force. The surviving sources document the omission, but do not definitively establish why the winners were left unidentified. Whether caused by administrative neglect, institutional indifference, or the racial attitudes of the period, the result was the same. One of the Tuskegee Airmen's greatest post-war victories became difficult for the public to find. Air Combat Command. The erasure was especially painful because the team had photographs, scores, and a trophy proving what it had accomplished. The men knew they had won. The competitors knew they had won. The Air Force had presented them with the trophy.
Yet official summaries failed to carry their names forward. Their victory existed, but remained suspended between memory and recognition. Harry Stewart and the recovery of the record. The story began to reemerge decades later. In 1993, Harry Stewart returned to Nellis Air Force Base and helped bring evidence of the 332nd's victory to the attention of Air Force officials. By April 1995, published records had been corrected to identify the 332nd Fighter Group as the winner of the 1949 competition. Researcher and Tuskegee Airmen advocate Zellie Orr later helped locate the missing trophy in storage at the National Museum of the United States Air Force at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, Ohio. It was eventually placed on public display. Air Combat Command. Recognition arrived nearly half a century after the pilots had earned it. But the struggle to place the victory fully within Air Force history continued. In January 2022, retired Lieutenant Colonel James Harvey returned to Nellis. Air Combat Command unveiled a commemorative plaque recognizing the 332nd Fighter Group's 1949 victory. The plaque was designated for permanent display at the United States Air Force Weapons School. Harvey had spent years seeking proper recognition not only for himself, but for Temple, Stewart, Alexander, and the entire 332nd team. Standing at Nellis 73 years after the competition, he was finally able to describe that mission as accomplished. The men behind the trophy. The victory belonged to a team, but each member carried his own story. Alva Temple had trained as a fighter pilot during the Tuskegee program and emerged as one of the competition's strongest individual performers. His accuracy helped place the team in command of the meet. Harry Stewart had flown combat missions during World War II and later played a central role in recovering the historical record of the 1949 victory. James Harvey continued into the jet age. He later became the first black fighter pilot to fly combat missions in Korean airspace, completing 126 missions in the F-80 Shooting Star and receiving the Distinguished Flying Cross. Halbert Alexander, the alternate, remained an essential member of the team and shared in the preparation, responsibility, and victory. He later died in an F-86 aircraft accident. Their names must be spoken together. Captain Alva Temple, First Lieutenant Harry Stewart, First Lieutenant James Harvey. First Lieutenant Halbert Alexander. 4 men representing an organization that America had attempted to limit, yet could not defeat. The 332nd's final victory as a segregated unit. The timing of the competition gave the victory additional historical weight. The Air Force had begun implementing President Truman's desegregation order. Rather than integrate white personnel into the successful 332nd organization, the Air Force dismantled the segregated unit and reassigned its black personnel throughout previously white organizations. On July 1, 1949, only weeks after the gunnery meet victory, the 332nd Fighter Group and Wing were inactivated as part of the integration process. The Nevada victory, therefore, became one of the organization's final major achievements before its members were dispersed throughout the Air Force. Segregation had created the 332nd because military leaders believed black aviators needed to be separated from white personnel. The pilots then transformed that segregated organization into a center of discipline, combat experience, and aviation excellence. When the unit finally disappeared, it did so not in defeat, but as the reigning champion of the Air Force's first fighter gunnery meet. More than a competition. The 1949 victory was not merely about marksmanship. It was about who was permitted to represent excellence. For generations, white institutions had claimed that black people lacked the intelligence, courage, mechanical ability, and emotional discipline required for aviation. The Tuskegee Airmen answered those claims during World War II. Then, in Nevada, they answered them again. They flew the older aircraft. They faced the elite teams. They led from the opening events. They struck target after target. They won the piston engine category. They won the entire competition. And when the historical record failed to honor them, surviving team members fought another battle to recover the truth. James Harvey later summarized the meaning of the victory plainly. They had been told black pilots were not supposed to fly and were not supposed to win. But they flew. They competed. And they were the best. The Tuskegee Airmen did not ask the nation to lower its standards. They met the highest standards available, and then surpassed the men who had been expected to defeat them. They did not win because history needed a symbol. They won because their training was superior, their teamwork was disciplined, and their weapons struck the targets. The trophy proved it in 1949. The record finally admitted it decades later.